Welcome everyone to StabilityHub's case history webinar about stability limbs, specifically its selection and implementation. This is the fourth in a series sponsored by Novatek International, who designs program management software for all types of products in any stage of its life cycle, from preclinical to clinical, or from manufacturing and post-marketing. So we encourage you to visit them at ntint.com. That's ntint.com and Novatek International. So now, if you would, please turn on your cameras if possible, but stay muted unless you're asked to comment further on a question. And use the Zoom chat feature to submit questions or comments at any time. Now, your questions take priority, your questions, but if we don't get enough questions from you, we do have an array of frequently asked stability limbs questions as backups. Today's topic addresses stability limbs from the viewpoint of the end user, and our panel includes stakeholders that have contributed significantly to various aspects in the process of converting from a manual to digitalized system or updating from one system to another. So before we get too far, I'd like to introduce the members of today's panel. I'm just making sure we don't have Susan Cleary, but we had been hoping for Susan Cleary. She's a director of product development at Novatek International, our sponsor. We have John O'Neill, who hopefully most of you have heard of. He's a longtime stabilitarian, the founder of PSGG and our facilitator. And he's also the editor at StabilityHub. Then there's me, Walter Routh. I'm a founder and CEO of Sagana Quality Consulting and ex-stability director at AbbVie and currently associate editor at StabilityHub. And most importantly, our presenter, Chris Latoz, manager of stability services at Hollister Inc. And he'll be introducing himself and the company shortly. So let's get started with today's presentation. This session is being recorded and will be available in the articles and videos section at stabilityhub.com. Again, questions are welcome via the chat feature. So Chris Latoz, the presentation is yours.
Thanks, Walter, and welcome everyone. Just a disclaimer. So I'm the manager of stability services at Hollister Incorporated, and we're a medical device manufacturer. We're located in the far north Chicago suburbs in Libertyville. And among our product lines are ostomy products, continence care products, skin care products, as well as critical care products. So these are strictly medical devices. We don't make any drug device combination products currently. This slide just shows you the array of products. You can see these are ostomy pouches. So these are worn by patients that have a surgical procedure called an ostomy. Primarily people that have severe cases of Crohn's or colitis, and they have to have part of the intestine removed. And then an artificial opening is made in the abdomen, and then they wear these collection devices to collect waste as it exits the body. We also make continence care products such as these intermittent catheters. So these are used primarily by spinal cord injured patients that have to self-catheterize in order to urinate. So these are all single-use disposable medical devices. Just want to kind of give you a little background on my company. Moving into this webinar, so I'm going to talk about the steps that we took and some best practices. If you are looking to maybe upgrade your current limbs, or perhaps you have a very manual process and you're looking to implement limbs at your facility for the first time. We'll also look at the stability limbs in action. Now, this won't be a live demonstration, but I do have some screenshots for an actual stability study. So it shows you some of the functionality of our stability limbs. So yeah, just for the agenda, I'll begin just to give you a background of our legacy stability process. And you'll see it's a very manual, labor-intensive process. Then I'll talk about the 12 steps that we took to select and ultimately implement a LIMS. And then finally, as I mentioned, we'll go over a case study. So this will show some screenshots of our stability LIMS and how we ran a stability protocol for one of our medical devices. So this is our legacy stability process. Now I should mention that we did our initial LIMS implementation back in 2014. So this predates this. However, there's probably companies out there now that handle things the same way that we did back then. So it's a very manual, labor-intensive system. It would begin with a written stability protocol. So this was in the form of a Word document. It would be written and would print out a hard copy, and literally it would be walked from office to office to get the required approval signatures. Once the protocol was approved, of course, we would order samples from one of our manufacturing locations because we don't manufacture any product at the corporate headquarters site where I sit. Then our technicians or analysts would create Excel spreadsheets to enter their test results. They would also create a poll calendar. So to schedule polls, they would do this all manually. Finally, the analyst or technician would execute the test, and then for each of the time intervals, they would enter the results in the Excel spreadsheet. Once we had a study completed, if it was accelerated or real time, we would take that data and then we would give that to our clinical stats group, who would perform, generally it was just basic regression analysis for us, but it would typically we'd be waiting 3 to 4 weeks for them to turn around that analysis and give us a statistical report. Certainly this wasn't their primary job function. They had a lot of other things, with clinical statistical studies and so forth. So they just really did this as a favor to us. Once we received that clinical stats report with the regression analysis, we would then write our stability report. Again, this was in the form of a Microsoft Word document. And much like the protocol, it was printed out, walked from office to office to get the required approval signatures. Then finally, once it was fully approved, we would scan a copy. So we'd have an electronic copy that was just placed on a network drive. And then the original hard copy was filed in a fireproof file cabinet. Just a couple examples. So this is a spreadsheet one of the analysts created to enter all the data for a couple tests. And this is that legacy poll calendar, very manual. So yeah, the date they placed samples in the chamber, that was the initiation date. Then they would literally go through the calendar. Many of our studies run through 60 months because our products, many of them have a 5-year expiration date. So they would physically go through calendars and set the dates for the poll. As you see here, when samples were removed from the chamber, they were crossed off the calendar. So that's really how we managed our stability program. This is just a Word document. So again, we had signatures filed, hard copy filed, and then of course it was scanned. So we had an electronic copy on a network drive. And example of a statistical report from our clinical stats group, and they used Statistica software back then to perform the regression for us. So as you can see, there's many challenges with such a system. Very manual and labor intensive. Again, we've got a lot of hard copies of protocols and reports. Manual data entry from the analyst or technician into Excel. We're using Word. We also used Access Database. There's a risk as far as data integrity. There's no audit trail. It's very difficult to validate spreadsheets. So somebody could go in to a cell of a spreadsheet, change data. You'd have no idea, who did what. Certainly wasn't 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. And in many cases, we'd have data scattered across multiple locations. Sometimes a technician would have a spreadsheet stored locally on their computer, and they would forget to upload that information to the network drive. So that was problematic. It was inefficient and error prone. Sometimes we would actually duplicate studies that we had done previously just because we could not find the data. Or perhaps time intervals were skipped, those types of things. As you can imagine, with this manual system, it was very difficult to track samples and uh, have an accurate sample inventory. So what we did is we had sheets mounted on each of our stability chambers, and it was the responsibility of the technician uh, to update those chamber logs. So whenever they put samples in the chamber, they would record, the date they put them in there, how many samples were placed in there, and then likewise, when they removed samples for a scheduled pull, they needed to record on that log sheet, what samples they took out, the date, and so forth. So you can imagine such a system like that is very error prone. It's really puts a lot of responsibility on the technician to keep those chamber logs up to date. Reporting was another problem. Again, we used our Microsoft Word documents for reports, but there was other kind of reports that would have been nice to have. So now we'll jump into the 12 steps that we took to select and implement a stability LIMS. So first and foremost, we hired an external consultant just for the purposes of auditing our existing, manual stability process. We, many times at companies, you can talk to senior leadership and make recommendations, but many times it carries more weight if it comes from an external consultant. So that was kind of the strategy behind this. So we did engage an external consultant. He spent 2 days on site monitoring all these manual processes that I just talked about. And in the end, his big recommendation was, we were at a severe compliance risk just because we had all this manual data into these databases, Excel spreadsheets, Access, and so forth, that weren't validated. So, with the regulatory agencies such as FDA as well as EU, it puts you at a compliance risk. So that carried a lot of weight. The consultant recommended that, to, shore up things that we really needed to explore some type of LIMS system. And he even recommended a couple of vendors for us to explore. Next step was to secure executive sponsorship. So this is senior leadership. So we had VPs and directors from both R&D as well as IT leadership. A key thing is you want to make sure that your project is going to align with organizational goals. Executive sponsorship helps you secure necessary resources you're going to need when you later on when you form your cross-functional team. And also they drive the project momentum. They are instrumental in helping you secure funding for such an endeavor as this. So once we had executive sponsorship, we then formed a cross-functional project team. Again, you never want to, vet out vendors, write user requirements in a vacuum. just within your maybe local stability group. You want to have a cross-functional team, so everybody has a different area of expertise, and there could very well, if you don't include other people, downstream, you may run into a lot of difficulties where the system doesn't do everything that needs to be done to satisfy, maybe regulatory requirements or particular requirements quality may have. So again, very important to have a cross-functional team. For our particular team, of course, we had members from the stability group. We had other members from R&D outside the stability group, quality, regulatory, and your IT department, of course, is very important as well. Again, with a cross-functional team, it helps facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing. You're not going to be an expert in everything, regulatory, quality, and even IT infrastructure. So it's important that the experts have a seat at the table, helping to ensure that all your needs are addressed. So the next step after forming the project team was to develop the business case and a project charter. Again, you have executive sponsorship, so that's very important, but you still need to develop a business case. You may not have funding fully approved at this point. That's why you need a business case. So for our business case, we really relied on a lot of what the external consultant said during his audit, that we were at a risk of, not being compliant. So that was one of the key things, enhance compliance and security. Such a system would have a comprehensive audit trail, change control, be Part 11 compliant. So it would really improve our overall, data integrity and security. As far as sample management, we would have more accurate and efficient inventory control, tracking of samples, presumably with barcode labeling. We would no longer have to rely on our analysts to create pull calendars. We would have automated pull calendars and alerts. And as far as data handling, we wanted query capabilities. As I mentioned, in some cases we couldn't find data. We didn't know where data existed, so we would end up repeating some of the stability protocols we may have done, several years prior. Built-in statistical analysis, regression analysis would be a very important feature. Again, we would no longer have to rely on our clinical stats group to perform those types of analysis for us, and it would expedite things because it would be in our control. We would no longer have to wait 3 or 4 weeks for the clinical stats group to turn around such a report. Again, besides our Word document reports that we were doing, we wanted the ability to generate, a variety of different reports, have, viewable poll calendars, trend analysis, and then also in the event that we had an out of spec or out of trend result, we wanted the ability to perform that investigation, directly in the software itself. The next step is to define the user requirements. And perhaps this may be one of the most important steps out of all of them. And what we did was we broke our user requirements really into 3 different categories. The mandatories, these are the must-haves, and these would have been showstoppers. So when we were looking at different vendors, if a particular vendor didn't satisfy one of our mandatory requirements, they were basically, crossed off the list. So these are the must-haves. Just as an example of a, mandatory user requirement, the system must provide enhanced data integrity and security. So when you write these out, we use the verbiage, the system must or the system shall, again, for the mandatory. Desirable is kind of the next class. So these are things that you want. They're not necessarily showstoppers. So if a particular, limb system doesn't satisfy desirable requirement, it may very well not necessarily be a showstopper, but it may also help you discriminate between different vendors if one vendor offers more desirable requirements than another one. That may be something to consider. And the way that we expressed these was the system should allow for. That's kind of the verbiage that we used. And then, of course, you have your optional. These aren't critical to the business. These are your nice to haves. Again, it may help distinguish among vendors. Perhaps you want the capability of having a, iPhone app that's going to link to your limbs, just as an example. It's not business critical. Perhaps it'd be nice to have. So some of the best practices for user requirements gathering, again, engage all your stakeholders, your project team, you've got all the different functions, you've got lab personnel, you have your, stability scientists, regulatory, QA, and so forth. Again, you just want to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table and all the requirements are, discussed, vetted among your stakeholders. It's a good idea to do a map of your current workflow. So sort of your current state and then what you want, your future state to look like once you've implemented your LIMS. Many times you're going to prioritize the user requirements based on impact. Perhaps, very high priority would be if it's a regulatory necessity. Planning for scalability is very important. It really depends on your use case. For us, the implementation was just at our Libertyville site, and we had roughly 15 users. So it's, relatively small scale. In some organizations, you may implement a LIMS at one location, but you have plans in the future to scale to other locations, add additional users, that type of thing. So you need to take that into consideration. Very important, your documentation when you are gathering and defining your user requirements. Again, you want to really distinguish between your must-haves, showstoppers versus desirable, and then finally optional user requirements. So just a little Dilbert cartoon. So this goes back, 20 some years. Dilbert was a popular, comic strip back in the day. This is just give me a chance to get a quick drink of water here. Okay. So some considerations when selecting your LIMS, of course, technical fit, that's why you have IT involved in the user requirements. You want to make sure that whatever LIMS you select is going to be compatible with the IT infrastructure at your location. We already talked a little bit about scalability, but always plan for future growth. Even if it's only going to remain at a single location, you may, your stability group may expand. You may need to add additional users. In some cases, some LIMS, stability LIMS systems have the capability. Typically, they have to do some type of interface, so some type of customization, but you have the capability of interfacing with other systems. This could be another laboratory instrument, so perhaps like an HPLC. So it would take data directly from your HPLC software and then dump it into your stability LIMS. Perhaps you have a document management system that you would like to interface with your stability LIMS. ERP system, maybe your company uses SAP. Those are all things to consider. Cost of ownership, of course, you're going to have a budget for this. So you need to consider, the initial purchase price, but are there any additional licensing fees? Typically, you need to have a annual, software support, maintenance, types of costs that have to be considered. Also for upgrades, how often are upgrades rolled out? Are they free? Are there fees for those types of upgrades? And also if you need customization, what expenses are going to be involved? Again, if you want the capability of integrating to another system, that is going to increase the complexity as well as the cost of the stability limbs. Usability, very important. If you have a LIMS and your users don't like the interface, there's a very steep learning curve. That's going to turn people off, and they're going to be reluctant to dive in and learn the system. Of course, training and support, very important. You're going to have multiple users that are going to have to be trained. After you implement the system, you're going to need support. You may find bugs down the road, um, those types of things. Features and functionality. Again, your core stability management tools. This will be defined in your user requirements. Advanced analytics and reporting. As I mentioned, for us, it was a mandatory user requirement that we had whatever software we selected would have the capability of performing, those basic regression analysis. Security and compliance. Of course, I think you'd be hard pressed now to find a commercial LIMS out there that wasn't Part 11 compliant. Or didn't have audit trails, data protection, those types of things. Very important that you look at the reputation of the vendor. Do they have a proven track record? Do they have experience in the industry? Is it just a brand new company, startup company that is just they have limited installations in the field. Those are things to consider. Also, customer references. Most vendors will be more than happy to provide you references, which you can call people and ask about their experiences with that particular vendor. And then how responsive a vendor is going to be, to your questions. A lot during the vetting process. We'll talk later on about requests for a proposal. Are those vendors, do they provide those RFPs back to you on a, quickly, or do they drag their feet? That might give you an idea of how responsive they're going to be, after purchase. So for our user requirements, again, we had, of course, our mandatory and optional and desirable, but we broke the general user requirements into these 8 categories. So we had particular requirements, just general. I'll give you some examples. We had requirements for our stability protocol, sample management, again, statistical analysis, as you see here. And of course, IT department's going to have particular user requirements. Again, you want to make sure whatever vendor you choose, that their LIMS system is going to be compatible with your IT infrastructure. So go through a couple examples. So again, this was in the category of general requirements. It was mandatory for us that whatever we selected was, they call it COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software. So we didn't want some customized solution. Mandatory, of course, 21 CFR Part 11 compliant. So these are things that we had, again, for our general system requirements. For stability protocols, one of the mandatory requirements we had was the system shall or must provide a drop-down list of commonly used test methods. We use a variety of test methods for our protocols, and it just was going to be a huge time saver if we could have a drop-down list so we didn't have to go in and manually type in a test method for every study that we're going to initiate. You'll see at the bottom, this was a desirable. So we wanted the system to dynamically link to our document management system. Again, we thought for test methods, it would be great if they could just click on a button. It would take you directly to our document management system, and they could, read the test method right there. Again, that was desirable. It wasn't mandatory. It turned out when it was all said and done, we opted not to pursue that particular requirement. I'll skip these. It just kind of gives you an idea of some of our user requirements based on those categories. So once we had our user requirements well-defined, agreed by all the stakeholders, the next thing we did, again, we had a couple of vendors that were recommended by our consultant. You can go online, Google search. So we ended up with 3 vendors. We first initiated confidentiality agreements with those 3 vendors, pretty standard practice. And then next, as I alluded to, we sent them the RFP. So this is a request for a proposal. So essentially what this was, you'll see on the next slide, this took all of our user requirements. Again, this was just as you see here, this was an example of some of the general requirements. We clearly identified if they were mandatory, desirable, or optional. And then, this was sent to each of the 3 vendors in the form of a spreadsheet. I think we had a roughly 100, 120 total user requirements. And we gave the vendors, I think, 30 to 45 days to respond. And then you can see on the right from this particular vendor, they would put comments in on how their particular LIMS system, satisfied the stated user requirement. Once we received those RFPs back, the next step was to score and rank each of those vendors. So we looked at things also besides how well they satisfied our user requirements, the strength of the company, how many employees they had, what type of revenue, if they would disclose that. Moving on down, I'll skip over the requirements fulfillment, but we had, software version. So how often did they have, upgrades, how current was their existing software, those types of things. And again, cost is always a consideration because you have to stay within your budget. So we, ranked all 3 of these vendors, and it turns out that vendor B was the one that we chose to move forward with. So next, we purchased the Stability LIMS from the vendor, and then step 10 was to validate the system. So this is your IQ, OQ, PQ, which is very important.
We have an interim question here that says, can you disclose what system you chose and why? You've kind of given the why, but could you disclose a little more about the system you chose and who they were?
Yeah. So again, this was back in 2014 when we did our original, selection and implementation. But yeah, Novatek Stability LIMS was the system that we went with. And you saw from the previous slide, I guess a couple slides back of, why we chose, vendor B being Novatek here. Yeah. So with that, Walter, I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
Yeah. Before we get into our exciting part about going live with this Novatek system, then I'd like to take this opportunity to invite those who are new to StabilityHub to visit our website, stabilityhub.com, and check out our featured publications, regulations, events, suppliers, our interactive forum, job opportunities, and more. And while there, if you haven't already, please sign up for our monthly newsletter to see what's new. As a part of the Pharmaceutical Stability Discussion Group, that's PSDG for short, StabilityHub is planning to to return to live PSDG meetings. That would be May 17th through 19th of next year in Raleigh, North Carolina, or in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and where attenders can spend part of 3 days asking questions, sharing information, touring facilities, meeting vendors, and networking. And who better to network with than fellow stabilitarians? So we're looking for companies in the U.S. that would like to host future meetings at their facilities, not this one, but future ones. And if you would like to learn more about attending or hosting those meetings, just contact us at stabilityhub.com/contact. So that's our advertisement section. And now back to Chris.
Thanks, Walter. So before you can actually go live, a critical thing is a validation summary report. Again, I mentioned you were going to be doing IQ, OQ, PQ. Once all that's complete, you really want to kind of summarize things that were done. And ultimately, you'll want to have some type of release statement. It's very important that you have, the key stakeholder sign off, quality, of course. Basically, it says, the validation's been complete and now the system is, suitable for use so you can go live. You need to have SOPs in place, however, before you go live. Outline operations of different functionality of your LIMS software and the system itself. One thing to consider is also some type of business continuity or disaster recovery plan. So if your LIMS goes down for whatever reason and you're, maybe, who knows what happens, but your LIMS goes down, you still need to carry on your stability testing, your reports and so forth. So really, what's your backup plan if your LIMS goes down? Another important consideration is the data migration. So for us, I talked about our legacy process. We had, a lot of data in Excel spreadsheets. So did we want to import all that data into the stability LIMS system, when we were going live, or were we just going to draw a line in the sand and say, well, we archive the historical stability data. Anything from this date on goes into the stability LIMS system. So that's something important to consider. Different vendors will approach it differently. In some cases, they may charge you extra to migrate your data into the system. It just really depends. It also depends what you want to do as a business. You want to conduct training sessions. So when you go live, at least, your key users have an idea how the system's going to work. So what's typically done is, when they install the software for the LIMS, they generally create a couple different user environments. Of course, you have your production system, which is your go live system. They'll generally create a training environment so you can go in, you can kind of play around with data sets and just kind of learn the functionality of software. And then quite often they'll also create a validation environment. So this is the environment you use when you're doing your IQ, OQ, PQ. And it's not till you officially go live when you start, entering things in your production environment. So as I mentioned, we did our original implementation back in August of 2014, and we did have one pretty substantial upgrade that we did back actually 2 years ago. It was in December of 2023. So it was a significant upgrade. The main thing was the original implementation of the software. It's a client server application. The server was a terminal server that was located on site. Over time, many companies are going to the cloud now for their server. So that was kind of the big jump here of getting rid of the terminal server, moving to a cloud-based system, if you will. Talking about timing. So from when we hired the external consultant, again, just to audit our existing stability program. To the time we went live was just under a year, so around 11 months. Again, depending on, the size of the system, how many users across how many sites your original implementation is going to be, your mileage may vary on this, but I think a good time frame is roughly around a year. Um, that worked for us. Again, relatively small, but yeah, it was just under a year. Some of the lessons we learned. So even though you go through IQ, OQ, PQ, you're provided test scripts that you execute. You may, after you implement your system, after you go live, you may discover some bugs that you didn't discover previously, and that certainly hasn't happened to us often, but it did happen a couple times. Again, that's why it's very important to choose a good vendor. In our particular case, Novatek was very responsive. They actually had to go and audit or really revise some of the source code for one of the functions, and then they do an impact assessment to determine whether change in source code is going to require what type of revalidation is going to be required for your system. So just keep that in mind. So now moving to a case study. So this is a kind of a real world example of how we used stability LIMS for our application. So again, at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about our products. This is really our flagship product here. This is a Vapro hydrophilic intermittent catheter. Again, it's a disposable, single-use device, typically used, 2 to 4 or 5 times a day by spinal cord injured patients that have to self-catheterize in order to urinate. Sterile product. One of our pieces of IP that makes our product unique is it has a no-touch sleeve. So over the tubing, you see a polymeric film. This really helps cut down on the cases of urinary tract infections. So what happens is when a patient is going to insert this, of course, they're going to generally wash their hands before they, touch the product. However, regardless of how clean your hands are, you're still going to have bacteria. So if you're touching the catheter tubing directly, that is going to go inside your body into your urethra. You have a greater risk of having a urinary tract infection. And in some cases, these actually can result in death. But with our patented no-touch sleeve, the patient touches the sleeve, and then the catheter tubing is run through that sleeve material. So the tubing that goes inside the urethra is never touched by the human hand. So unlike drug products or even combination drug device products, we don't have an active ingredient. Again, this is strictly a medical device. So some of the key stability indicating tests for such a device, lubricity, again, product is going into urethra, so it needs to remain lubricious throughout the shelf life of the product. And we measure that by coefficient of friction test, which I have a slide on. You can see that we have some components that are bonded to this tubing. So we have a funnel. You see a green funnel on the right. That's bonded to that catheter tubing. And then we also have what we call the introducer tip on the left. We have that no-touch sleeve that I just talked about. So that's bonded both to the tip as well as to the funnel. So we want to make sure that those bond strengths don't decrease, as the product ages. The catheter coating has to remain lubricious. So it's hydrophilic in nature. So we do FTIR of the catheter coating just to make sure we don't see any gross chemical changes as the product ages. As I mentioned, it's sterile product, so package integrity is very important. We want to make sure that the packaging maintains a sterile barrier throughout the shelf life of the product. Uh, Package is sealed along the edges, so we want to make sure that the seal strength doesn't decrease as the product ages. So these are really our key quality attributes that we're assessing in our stability protocols for such a product. A couple screenshots, nothing really fancy here. So this shows you the test that I just described. Protocol numbers. So this is actually generated from our document management system. So we do write formal stability protocols that really give a lot of background of why we're initiating the study. We talk about materials of construction, how many samples, what kind of sterilization process the product's going to go through, and those types of things. So the number you see here was actually generated from our electronic document management system. Then the system, generates Novatek system generates a study registration number that you see at the top. And again, we have the ability to link it to our, official stability protocol number. Other information that's put in there is, manufacturing date, what type of product it is, and so forth. Kind of skip quickly through this. This is a number of results that we're requesting for each of the tests, and you can see our time intervals. This particular product has a 24-month expiry date on it. And this is kind of the dashboard, if you will, or the home screen. So again, this shows you the poll calendar. So I could search by our formal stability protocol number, which I did, and then you can see the samples that have already been removed from the chamber are indicated on the left by the green stoplight, if you will. Red indicates that's sample awaiting retrieval. So those are the polls you have scheduled still. I just go through this quickly because we're getting low on time. So for coefficient of friction, we use a particular piece of test equipment from Harland, and essentially the catheter tubing, removed from the packaging. We do cut off the no-touch sleeve. We mount it vertically, and it's pulled up between these two rubber plates, and we're just really measuring the ratio of that frictional force to the normal force. It's a dimensionless unit, coefficient of friction. Again, allows us to assess lubricity. Bond strength. So I mentioned, a lot of these different bonds that we have of that no-touch sleeve to the tip, sleeve to the funnel. So these are just done by using a tensile test machine. You may have heard of Instron. You may be familiar with Instron. We have a different vendor. So MTS is the equipment that we use to look at these types of bond strengths. We use accelerated aging at 45 degrees C, real times at 25. This allows us to use, conservatively, accelerated aging factor of 4. So for this catheter product, if we age 6 months at 45 degrees C, that's the equivalent of 24 months at real time. I did redact the results, but this is just a results summary table from the software. This is really the power, in my opinion, of the software is the ability to do the regression in the LIMS itself. So again, for this particular test, this is the seal strength of the funnel end to the sleeve. Again, done by that tensile test. You can see this is 45 degrees C accelerated aging. So we've got 4 time intervals going out through essentially 6 months. And you can see our acceptance criterion is in the green. Our regression line is indicated in the red, and then the lower 95% confidence band is what you see in the black here. Software does do an extrapolation. So based on this, it says the lower limit is met at essentially 26 months. So if you extrapolate out that black 95% lower confidence band would intersect the lower limit at essentially 26 months, again with accelerated aging factor of 4, that predicts to roughly 104 months of shelf life for this particular product. Just to give you an example. To save time, I'm gonna skip through. These are more or less the same. So these are different regression analysis for the different test. Um, skip. Same with real time. So you can do your regression analysis for your real time data. This is one of the many reports that you can generate from the system. So this is your typical stability data summary report. Uh, Kind of the default is it generates this in the form of a PDF. You do have the option of exporting the data into a variety of different formats, including Excel. You can do CSV, even Word documents, depending on your need. Last slide that I'll show as far as the actual system, and I think this is a very powerful tool as well. So if you have multiple lots of a product, the question is, at the end, do you do one regression line and put all 3 lots of product on the regression line, or do you need to do, 3 separate regression analysis, one for each of the lot? So it gets to, data poolability. Are you able to pool the data or not? And this really depends on, are the slopes and the intercept the same, or are they different, and so forth. In this particular case, the software does this for you. Says you have separate slopes and separate intercepts. So for this particular case, you need to do, a regression for each lot as opposed to putting all 3 lots for one regression analysis. So that's built right in. Okay. So conclusion and key takeaways from this whole, LIMS selection and implementation. Again, you do not want to operate in a vacuum just with your stability group. You need cross-functional teams, IT, regulatory, quality, stability, maybe other folks in R&D in order to ensure success. Again, perhaps the most important, step is really defining your user requirements. Uh, you know, Coming together again, you have that cross-functional team, make sure that everybody has a say, what they need the system to do. And again, breaking your user requirements into the mandatory required as well as optional requirements. There's a lot of documentation, as you can imagine. You need to have your SOPs for your stability LIMS. Business continuity plan, as I talked about earlier. Of course, you've got all your validation reports, your IQ, OQ, PQ. Back in 2014, when it was all said and done, I had 3 binders on my bookshelf that were literally probably, 12 to 16 inches, across. So a lot of documentation as far as the validation goes. Again, choose your vendor wisely. It's important. I mean, this is an investment. I mean, this is certainly not as much as a ERP system like SAP, but you're talking $100,000, on up, depending on a number of users. Licensing from different vendors is different. It could be by concurrent users in the system, or they may have require each user of the system to have an individual license. It really depends. When it was all said and done, just to give you an idea, we estimated and improved the efficiency of the stability group by roughly 20%. Not only improving efficiency, but we also improved, with our compliance, because that was really the big risk, and it helped us, uh, find our stability data, have it in one database, so we didn't have to go looking at multiple locations and then doing redundant stability studies. So here's my contact information. So definitely feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything I could help you with. And we do have a few minutes left, so yeah, a couple references for the this presentation. So with a bit of time remaining, I guess I'll turn it back to John and Walter.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris. That was very, very interesting and cool. So we do have a question here that John has put up as, did you incorporate any bolt-on, I think it might be add-ons to the or programs to the main program?
We did not. We did not do that, and we still haven't done that. When it was all said and done, uh, you know, it would have been nice if we could have linked this to our document management system, but again, there's additional expense. It adds to the complexity. It'd be something that'd be nice to have, but it certainly wasn't critical for us. I will say, Novatek, they do offer many different modules. So they offer, calibration and environmental monitoring. Other vendors may as well, but you can link their modules together. So you could, if you had their stability LIMS, you could actually pull other information into that. So that may be something to consider as well.
Sure. And real quick, and just a quick question I had to you as well. When you use your commercial off-the-shelf system, you're ensuring that you'll have to modify your processes. You mentioned a 20% increase in efficiency, which is great. But can you give some examples of what modifications you had to make because of the software?
Yeah. Well, I mean, more than anything, it really, the technicians didn't have to do all those labor intensive things. So they didn't have to create the poll calendar. They, sometimes they couldn't find samples with the legacy system. So they would literally, be walking to, we have 11 chambers on site. So, I mean, they may, they may look at different chambers, trying to find samples for a particular poll. And then just, trying to find data. So we're getting ready to write a stability report, and we're missing, for whatever reason, we can't find one of the time intervals. So we have to hunt technicians down and find out, oh yeah, they have it locally on their computer, but they forgot to upload it to the shared drive. Those types of things like that primarily.
Okay.
I see we're into our closeout period here, and there's a question from Denise about interested in polling the audience. So I'm afraid we won't have time for that, but we can do that on our website. So
Yeah.
we'll put that question out there at some point. But maybe you can answer the question if Novatek would work with your stability program is completely outsourced.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly think it could. Different application, but I would imagine that they have users, there's perhaps they could even give you a reference of somebody that outsources their stability program, but they use Novatek to manage, the results and polls and that type of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Walter, would you take us home, please?
Yeah, wow, our time has flown. So I just want to thank our sponsor, Novatek International, and our panelists. Thank you so much, Chris, for the valuable input to this program. And I'll take the remaining minute to highlight some upcoming programs that we have. So be sure to join us on January 22nd for another webinar. It's on stability CDMOs. Then on February 26th, we have our annual online celebration of the National Medical Product Stability Day. Now, you may have seen slide 47. He brushed over it real quick, but it was on the Arrhenius equation, which is Arrhenius is the whole point of our Stability Day celebration. February 19th is his birthday. So that'll be February 26th. You'll have stories about stability. You'll have a virtual parade and a bunch of other things just to make it really cool Stability Day, if you can call stability cool. Yes, we are cool. Okay, again, on May 17th through the 19th will be our triumphant return to in-person PSTG meetings. This means 3 days of peace, love, and letting the stability discussion roll. So let your management know now that you'd like to attend. And you can request an agenda from us at stabilityhub.com/contact. So for these events, just watch for announcements and sign up links in the Stability Hub newsletter and in the events section of the stabilityhub.com website. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Novatek International, our panelists, and to you, our worldwide keepers of stability and patient safety, for attending today. So we trust you found it informative, and we hope to see you again soon. Okay, goodbye.
Yep.